Our first speaker today will be Soona Samsami, who is the U.S. representative of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And Soona will be talking about, give a quick summary of the past 40 years, a look at the uprising and where it's come from and where it's going, and then talk also about the role of the resistance and the prospects for change in Iran. Before turning to you, Soona, I just want to point out one part of that video that really struck me, and it may not be immediately evident to everybody, but there were lots of pictures of banners with Maryam Rajavi, the leader of the MEK, the resistance. You know, don't take those things for granted, in the sense that this woman is enemy number one of the regime. Anybody associated with her or the movement is subject to the most violent repression and the intense attention of all the security services in the country. So, you know, while it might sort of not seem remarkable to you that there are big banners with her hanging from the roads, I think it's important to remember that everybody associated with that action, the people who printed it, the people who put it, who photographed it, the people who hung it, the people who distributed it, they are taking incredible risks with their own lives and their families' lives. And if you don't believe that, just remember what happened in the summer of 1988, when the government of Iran murdered, killed, executed in the span of about 4 months 30,000 MEK members. From June to September, these were people who had been imprisoned, who had been charged but not convicted with political crimes, and because the regime so feared their potential for derailing the revolution, they had them murdered. They were killing them so fast they couldn't bury them. They were hanging them en masse from cranes. So again, the people who put those banners up are very mindful of what happened to their predecessors. So this isn't some kind of game they're playing. This is a matter of life and death that is very real. So yes. Sue, I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Early, for introduction, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our event today on the February 11th, marking the historic victory of anti-monarchic revolution in 1979. Before I continue on my speech, I want to follow what Ambassador Adam Early mentioned. What are the kind of sacrifices these people, when they have a flag or a picture of Mrs. Rajavi on the streets or any corner of Iran? This is a book that I have in front of me. This is a partial list of 120,000 people that have been executed through years in Iran because standing or anyhow any association with the MEK, Iranian opposition, prominent opposition inside Iran. And it's pages and pages I have in front of me, list of their names, age as young as 12, 13 years of age, girls and boys, to mothers of 70 years of age and so on, that they have been any way been associated with MEK, you know, supporting them, providing money for them, standing in prison for their cause of their freedom in Iran, but somehow associated with the and the book is available here for anyone that wants to come and look at the book. This is only a name of 20,000 of them, which we gathered from inside Iran with high risk of families that provide this information to us. And today it has been the most valuable asset we have as for the history of people in the last 40 years that have been resisting to the Ayatollahs in Iran. So once again, today, February 11th, marks the historic victory of anti-monarchic revolution in 1979, when the nationwide protest by Iranian people toppled the Shah dictatorship, known for his notorious prison and SAVAK, and lavish spending of his corrupt regime. Short after, however, Khomeini essentially stole the leadership of the genuine revolution and installed a clerical regime. The mullahs betrayed the lofty ideals of the revolution. Iranian people were chanting and wanted democracy, but the regime put the theocracy in power. Through all these years, especially more clearly since 2017, the Iranian people have demanded regime change in Iran. The regime now, it's at its weakest point and running out of options. Today, I would like to elaborate on three areas. One, why we call Iranian regime so vulnerable, and number two, what is the domestic picture in Iran, and the widespread and increasingly organized protests inside Iran, and number three, what is the viable alternative to the regime in Iran. So on the terms of the Iranian regime be in its weakest point possible in last 40 years, the Iranian people's conflict against the theocracy is not new. It started in day one. In 1979, Khomeini had to establish his unpopular theocracy through intimidation, suppression of free speech, foreign war, elimination of political parties, and trend of human rights violation that had made Iran the regime into a pariah. So the regime's first source of weakness is lack of popular legitimacy. The Iranian people are calling for establishment of a republic based on democracy and separation of religion and state. In contrast to regime's attempt to paint a picture of strength on its 40th year in power, its reality is its weakest point in history. Corruption is rampant. Supreme Leader Khamenei owns dozens of major money foundations in Iran. One of them, known as cited, SETAD, has over $95 million worth of assets, most of which came as a result of confiscation of wealth of poor Iranian citizens. And it has been reported that Larijani, who is head of the judiciary and supposed to technically be in charge of corruption cases, we have found he has more than 63 personal bank accounts full of embezzled public money. Credit institutions tied to the regime have stolen hundreds of millions of dollars from depositors, leading to daily protests. Saman al-Hujaj is one of these institutions. Saman al-Hujaj. It grew to 500 branches all over Iran and managed hundreds of millions of dollars. It then lent a major portion of investor savings to government and military officials and declared that it cannot pay back the investors. The value of national currency against other major currencies have dropped over 70% just last year. The purchasing power of Iranian workers dropped by more than 48% in early June 2018. Regime officials are now pointing to inflation, reduction of purchasing power, unemployment, and poverty as code of regime mega challenges. A prominent Iranian economist said recently, 30% of country's population, which is 26 million out of 84 million people, live in absolute poverty, while Iran sits in gas and oil number 2 in the world. And 6% are technically starving. A December study by a research center of Iranian parliament showed more and more people slipping to poverty, especially in 2018. In September, a cautious report by the regime's parliament itself said that unemployment figures are alarming and soaring trend will give rise to crises. This is the quotation of the regime. According to the study, more than 3 million job seekers had been added to those already unemployed, during the years 2014 to 2017. Independent economists put unemployment figures at close to 40%. The regime has demonstrated its inability to deal with these crises. At the same time, in order to cover up its weakness at home, it has escalated its interference and warmongering in the region. Its terrorism, meddling, and missile program are major contributors to the chaos and instability in the region. Billions of dollars are spent to advance its agenda in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. The Iranian people want none of them. And on the issue of the uprisings, in December of 2017 and early 2018, Iranians in all 31 provinces rose up against the regime, first protesting against rising prices, but quickly turned into political chanting like regime change in Iran, and they demanded regime change. And you saw some of the pictures of it, very few of the hundreds of pictures and clips coming from Iran. The New York Times reported, quote, "It's an unusually bold act of defiance. Protesters in Tehran and elsewhere called for the resignation of Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei, and witnessed described crowds chanting, 'Death to dictatorship,' and 'clerics should get lost.'" The fact is that these protests were simmering for years, with smaller acts of dissent spread country by workers, students, nurses, women, teachers, prisoners, defrauded investors, farmers, and others. Last week, Khamenei acknowledged that the Iranian people have deep-seated economic grievances. He said people, quote, "complaining." The protesters especially blamed the regime's corruption and its foreign adventurism for their pains. They chant, "No to Gaza, no to Lebanon, my life for Iran." They say, "No to Gaza, no to Lebanon, my life for Iran," or "Leave Syria, think about us instead." Leave Syria, think about us instead. Protests and strikes in various cities have continued with support and guidance of units of resistance organized by the primary opposition, Mujahideen Khalq, MEK. The regime's interior ministry said in an assessment that 85% of protesters were under age of 35. Majority of population in Iran is a youth population. In 2018 alone, 10,000 people were detained because of demonstrations. At least 50 were killed. 14 more were tortured to death while in detention. But importantly, the regime couldn't stop these people and these demonstrations. The protests have now expanded to all sectors of society. The Bazaar protests were the first major people that in 40 years, which used to viewed as a traditional supporter of the regime, also came to the scene, and you see they keep striking after the other. So if the Iranian people are rising in such numbers against the regime whose power is being eroded day by day, then the question is, who's the alternative? On the question of the alternative, Tehran's reaction to organized opposition is a clear indication that there is a viable alternative to the regime in form of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, which was established in Tehran in 1981. The NCRI is essentially a parliament in exile with hundreds of members, half of them women, including athletes, politicians, members of ethnic and religious minorities, musicians, artists, economists, and others. Its main component is principal opposition, MEK. The NCRI president-elect, Maryam Rajavi, represents the demands and aspirations of Iranian people and protesters in recent years. Units of resistance posted her pictures, as you saw in the film, in major highways, in the streets, in every corner of Iran. Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan for future of Iran includes policy formulations like separation of church and state, abolition of death penalty, universal suffrage and elections, gender equality, peace and coexistence with neighbors, freedom of press and speech. In the NCRI's mind, the Iran of tomorrow should essentially be a free, democratic, and non-nuclear republic. It's no wonder, then, that the Iranian regime wanted to bomb the Free Iran rally organized annually in Paris in 2018. The bomb plot ended up with an official Iranian diplomat being arrested in Belgium, which is an unprecedented development in itself. The regime views the MEK as an existential threat, capable of organizing protests and leading them to overthrow the government. In 2018, Khamenei personally named MEK in his public speeches 4 times, and this is just last year of 2018. And Rouhani has directly blamed all these protests on MEK and calling the Macron, president of French, Rouhani directly blaming MEK for organizing these public protests. At the same time, regime has launched an extensive and astonishing demonizing campaign against MEK. Total of 19 movies and 136 movies and videos. These are run in channels so many times. 519 books published against MEK in order to deviate the attention of the youth from the realities of the MEK and the opposition. And I'm talking about, like, just in 2018, 18 major books were published. There are numerous blogs, websites, and accounts that are operational aims against MEK to demonize it. The regime also pays journalists abroad to publish fake stories against the MEK. The head of the major Canadian think tank revealed that Iranian regime embassy offered him $80,000 to refer MEK as a cult in his publications. But none of the efforts and propaganda by the regime have been effective to neutralize the MEK. That explains why in January of 2018, when the protests were at their height, Rouhani personally phoned French President Macron and asked him to limit the activities of MEK in France. And Macron refused. A former minister of Iranian regime labor said MEK were the ones making the calls for protest. With these slogans, they were able to gain the support of a number of people. This is a quotation of him. A website tied to the intelligence ministry said, MEK have infiltrated into many social sectors among all walks of life of Iranian people, including truck drivers, bazaar store owners, people whose life savings have been stolen by state-run firms, teachers, workers, and so on, unquote. Friday Prayer leaders, including those in city of Qom, said, do not allow MEK to change these slogans and seize the rallies. Among regime officials said 70% of the clips calling for protest and turmoil are from channels connected to the MEK. These are unquote again. Unable to defeat MEK, then the regime resorted to terrorism. At least 3 major terrorist plots coordinated by the regime against the NCRI and MEK specifically were uncovered in 2018 in US, Albania, and France. Expulsion of 5 Tehran diplomats from Europe, including its ambassador in Albania, is unprecedented and clearly indicates the regime is desperately resorting to terrorism to ensure its survival. So, what I want to conclude is the Iranian regime is very weak, weakest in its history. It lacks internal legitimacy, as you see in the show, in the clip. The primary enemies are the Iranian people and their organized resistance MEK, and the NCRI. The regime's internal policies, its human rights violations, economic mismanagement have depleted its strategic capital. It has no solution to these massive crises and no way to curb the uprisings. At the same time, its regional designs are not going anywhere. Put simply, the regime is at a strategic dead end. However, there is an alternative, NCRI, the Iranian people relying on units of rebellion that you saw some of them in the picture, and the organized opposition will be able to lead the true democratic change within Iran without foreign interference. However, for this change to happen, it is essential that we recognize the right of the Iranian people to unseat the repressive rulers. Thank you.
Thank you, Soona.